What's up? What's up? How's it going? Happy Tuesday to everybody. Today's going to be hopefully another educational episode of Bitches Love Sports. I'm your host, Jazz Monet. And I see a couple people already in the comments. I'm curious. I want y'all's opinion on something. Is it just me, or does this time of year just feel like kind of boring? Like everybody's just waiting for the combine to start and literally just searching for things to talk about? Because I'm not going to lie. I've got a few things up that are interesting to me, but as far as like things that are really moving the needle in terms of like, this is what's about to happen with the Dallas Cowboys, a lot of it's just like a lot of speculation, which can be fun to talk about sometimes, don't get me wrong. But I'm not really a speculation person. I'm a this is a thing that happened. This is how I feel about it person, or this is a thing that happened. This is something you should know about it person. I'm definitely not just oh yeah, like I think this thing might happen and I'm going to talk about it for 90 minutes because it's a thing that could possibly happen. Hey Bachi, how's it going? Good to see you in the chat. Good to see you too, Dom. Thank you so much for showing up and being active and interacting. I appreciate everyone who is watching both on YouTube and on Twitter. So, all that being said, this is going to be a relatively quick show. We're going to talk about Stephen Jones's comments. We're going to talk about some of the news that came out about the combine. And on that note, the first thing that we're going to get into is shout outs and call outs. So, got a few shout outs for the NFL, all related to the combine. And this is kind of the educational part of the show because some of it is things that you might not even know is happening at the combine. One of them, if you're very much into stats and analysis, might be interesting to you. But it's definitely a lot of me nerding out. But there is like some, game analysis in there. So that should be fun to talk about. But the first shout out to the NFL goes to the people who are in charge of the women's forum. So basically, at the combine, now here's something that's important to know. The combine is sponsored by Noble, but it's mostly the footage and the coverage that's sponsored by Noble. So you might see like the combine brought to you by Noble, but that has a lot to do with NFL media, NFL digital media, NFL Plus, so on and so forth. But AWS, I've told y'all so many times that Amazon and the NFL are very much in bed together. So AWS, of course, is the operating system that Amazon sells to a lot of companies that it works with. It is also the operating system that is behind Next Gen Stats. And they are also the organization that is behind a lot of the NFL's initiatives that are related to women, minorities, social justice, so on and so forth. So AWS is presenting a women's forum at the NFL Combine. And so what this is it's an annual women forum. It's the 8th annual one. It's going to be on February 27th and 28th. Is that today? Yeah, that's today and tomorrow. And it's 40 women, 60% of whom are women of color, with leaders in professional football to provide insight and networking opportunities for their careers. And so the areas of professionalism are scouting, data and analytics, coaching, and football operations. So basically, the NFL is like, 40 sounds like a low number. I'm not gonna lie, but I also think there's not that much interest from women in those areas when it comes to sports. So I don't know. We can tackle the number later, but it's 40 women, 60% of whom are women of color. So that would be 24 women of color. And they're basically connecting them with people who are already in the NFL to help them go into scouting, data analytics, coaching, and football operations. And this is a long ass title, y'all. The NFL Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Jonathan Bean, said, "We are proud of how impactful the Women's Forum has been in making football inclusive and accessible to women at all levels of the league. Ensuring opportunities for women throughout football remains a top priority, and the Women's Forum is key in making that a reality." Another situation I think this is connected to, I should say, with the NFL is the NFL's investment in flag football. What flag football has done is brought a lot of women to the sport of football as a whole. Obviously, not playing tackle football as much. There is a women's football association that does tackle football. The NFL is not so closely associated with that for whatever reason. But the NFL is investing heavily into flag football, making it an Olympic sport. And a lot of the stars of flag football, which is a small fan base, but if you start to get into the fan base and who's really into it, you'll find that a lot of the stars of flag football are women. So I think this is like a double bonus for the NFL in the sense that it looks like, goodwill towards the community. It helps diversify the leadership in actual NFL organizations, and it helps set them up to better keep control of the flag football community and ensure that they stay connected to it and they don't, excuse me, that they don't experience this like disconnect because the flag football community is so different than the NFL community and the tackle football community. So shout out to the NFL for that. Um, and something else that is happening at the NFL Combine is the sixth annual Big Data Bowl. So if you're very much into analytics, if you like looking at the stats, if you like looking at the charts that go into the stats, if you like the way you're able to break down your favorite players' performances because of how much tracking is happening. So there's all the stuff that's on next gen stats. Like there's stuff that, the average person doesn't even have access to, right? And then a lot of people this season had a lot to say about the Amazon Prime Thursday night football coverage, and especially I forget what it's called, but there are several simulcasts on Amazon Prime when you go to watch Thursday night football. And so there's like the one where they're doing interviews, there's the main coverage, there's usually a couple of other ones, like the one LeBron James hosted a few times. And then there's also the one that shows like a lot of stats and a lot of charting on the screen, a lot of tracking on screen. And that's the one that a lot of people were very interested in. And so that's something that's powered by AWS in conjunction with Next Gen Sports. And one of the ways they get a lot of the technology and a lot of the coding that allows them to do that is through this particular contest. So it's called the Big Data Bowl. And basically, they're like, hey, we're going to award prize money to people who can help us with analytics. And so you have all these people generating code, coming up with programs, and basically using game footage to figure out how they can track players on the screen. So they don't even have to physically be there. They can literally use the footage that they're getting and use special types of coding and special types of analytical software to come up with new ways of analyzing player data. And so this year, they were told to analyze tackling specifically. So a lot of the projects that were submitted were they were leaning heavy into the defensive side of the ball. But of the finalists, there are a couple that I think could actually help on both sides of the ball. I'm gonna read a couple of y'all's comments and then I'm gonna get into who the finalists were. Money's Ed. So they still going through scheme strategies. Oh, you're talking about taking so long to get the coaches in the building. I agree with you on that. And that's part of why I'm not really talking about that today, because there's still some moving pieces when it comes to coaches. But at some point, probably this week, we will at least start talking about the coaches. But I think there's a lot to figure out and iron out in that arena. But I don't disagree with you at all. And then Dom said Zim and Mike McCarthy not being there. I'm assuming you mean at the combine is really odd to me. It's happened before. So I don't know if it's always odd to you. I will say it's odd to me, especially when you watch the coverage of the combine at this stage, this early in the week, and you see other teams, their head coaches are actually there. And some of the teams, they have their head coaches and their GMs there. And the Cowboys sent their president, not their GM. Well, I'm assuming Jerry is there somewhere, maybe. I don't know. But Steven was the one doing all the talking today. And Mike McCarthy and Zim are not there, like you acknowledged. And I think one of the reasons why it's really interesting to me is because the Cowboys do have so much to figure out, not only in terms of personnel, but also in terms of culture, right? And we're going to actually talk about that later, because Stephen Jones said some things that I disagree with in regards to the culture of the Dallas Cowboys. So we are going to go into that. But when it comes to who should be there, I just feel like those interviews, everybody talks about how important the interviews and conversations are at the combine. And so with that being the case, I think it would make sense for Mike McCarthy to actually be there. And, it turns out that apparently, they're there via Zoom. They're asking questions via video conference and whatnot. In my opinion, it's not the same, but that's how they're doing it. Nothing we can really do about it now. And hey, but we'll talk about that a little bit more when we go into the culture piece, because Stephen Jones had a quote and that just had me like, Really? That's your stance on that? Okay. Hence the thumbnail of this video. But we're gonna get into that. But I want to talk to y'all about these projects. And Dom said, that's insane. Why would people give away IP? Well, here's the thing, Dom. The IP technically would not exist if not for this contest, because basically the NFL gives them access to certain footage, to certain aspects of AWS and next gen stats that they would not normally have access to, except that they're working on these projects. There's also a good amount of prize money at stake, right? So they're getting paid, and they're also getting access to the things that they need in order to complete these projects that they can only get through the NFL. And so basically, in exchange, they complete these projects. Now, all of them are not going to be used. This year, there were 300 entries, and I just don't see the NFL and Amazon using 300 different projects. Some of these are pretty fucking good though. So I'm going to talk about the finalists with you guys and how using their projects could really change how we look at certain players. Um, and if the runners up and honorable mention are nearly as good, then there's a lot of good stuff that they can use. But if I were to go over the runners up and honorable mention, we'd be here all night. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk about the 6 finalists with you guys. And some of them, their projects, I'm going to pull up on the screen so you can kind of see how they work. And just keep in mind that these are all rough drafts. They haven't been like refined and polished and all that stuff. But yeah, so I'm gonna read to y'all a little bit about the Big Data Bowl. So it's an annual contest. This is the 6th one, and they call it a yearly sports analytics competition. And it's hosted by NFL Football Operations Data and Analytics Team, and then of course there's the contributions from AWS. And so from their press release, it says this year's Big Data Bowl participants are eligible for $100,000 in prize money, with each finalist receiving $12,500 and runners-up receiving $5,000. This year's competition will conclude with an in-person event at the 2024 NFL Scouting Combine. So that's another thing. They get to go to the Combine, which of course they'll get the red carpet treatment, all that. Indianapolis on Wednesday, February 28th. With the 5 finalists, oh my bad, it's 5, not 6, competing for an additional $12,500 in prize money. So they already got money, and now they get to go to the combine, present their project, and possibly get more money. So they are getting paid. The keynote speaker of the event will be Mike Fitzgerald, Vice President of Research and Development and Assistant General Manager with the Arizona Diamondbacks, who will discuss how to implement modern data science and analytical tools in professional sports organizations. So this is becoming like a big deal in sports. There was a lot of talk about it like maybe going away, I think because of the ways in which it went awry, but it actually seems like it's expanding because, like I said, all of these projects just about focus on the defensive side of the ball because they asked the participants this year to focus on tackling. And so not only is it not going away, but it actually seems to be expanding because in the past, a lot of the analytics that we've seen used in games have really focused on play calling and decisions that should be made on the offensive side of the ball. And so now here we see the NFL and AWS saying, hey, all that stuff that we figured out for the offensive side, do it for the other side. Like, help us figure out. So the first finalist listed, it's a pair of analysts working together named Ben Davis, and I hope I don't mess this up, Nityan Rahendran. And it's called Pull the Plug, Optimizing Defensive Tactics Against Power, Counter, and Long Trap. And so basically they asked the question, how do defenses pull the plug on this resurgence in pulling linemen? And how can they retain the advantages of modern defensive structures while remaining stout against the run game? And so they basically put together a project. It's focused more on coaching than on formations and whatnot. But they basically put together this project to analyze what's happening whenever offensive linemen pull and what defenses should do in most cases in order to make sure that they're effective against that. So I like the concept, but it wasn't my favorite. The next one is called Uncovering Tackle Opportunities and Missed Opportunities. Now, this one I really like, so I'm going to pull it up on the screen for you in a second. But it's brought to us by Matthew Chang, Catherine Dai, Daniel Jang, and Harvey Chang. And so they said in their presentation, we present a new set of metrics to analyze how well defenders perform in the tackling process. So they analyzed tackle probability, tackle opportunity, missed tackle opportunity, and converted tackle opportunity. So This was one of the ones that I really liked. So I'm going to see if I can bring it up here on the screen. We're going to go here. We're going to go share. I wonder what camera angle will get of me today. I'm going to just leave it like that, whatever. Okay, um, so they have like these long science project type things. And so essentially they're able to analyze the footage and come up with these charts that track, like we discussed, tackle opportunities and converted tackle opportunities, as well as missed tackle opportunities. And so as we scroll down, we can see how the video lines up with this chart here. So one of the things that this is going to allow them to do is to dive a little bit deeper into missed tackle opportunities, when they happen, the scenarios in which they happen. And instead of just being like, okay, this guy is missing a lot of tackles, they're able to pair detailed charts like this one with video footage like this one and actually kind of get into the nitty gritty of what's causing this player to miss tackles. And so what this does is it helps anybody who's in charge of helping their players not miss so many tackles, instead of like addressing things generally like form, like proper technique, like opportunities, to actually get into the details of what's going wrong there. And so my favorite thing about it was just the way the video goes along with the chart. I was like, this is fabulous, because that's multiple players who are on the chart. One of the other things I think this will do is if there's a particular player who's causing issues for a defense. So let's say we get this chart like this that's moving across your screen right now. And let's say there's a division rival that you play twice a year. And when you play that division rival, that chart looks way different. So now instead of like watching film over and over again and trying to like slow it down, you can actually just like look at this chart, look at the seconds on the chart, and look at where the chart looks different and be like, okay, when we go to tackle this guy, these are the points at which we go wrong. 2.35 seconds, 5.25 seconds, so on and so forth. So I kind of dig it. I think it's pretty cool. Next up, we've got momentum-based fractional tackles, which is another one that I really liked. So essentially, the group that worked on that project said, rather than relying solely on observed tackle events, we leverage the tracking data to identify when a defender is in the contact window of a ball carrier. Now, y'all, this one was my favorite. This one was actually pretty cool. Let me pull it up for you. So the reason why I thought this one was really cool is because, like, if you ever look at stats, for example, my layout is going crazy. But if you ever look at stats, for example, right, you'll see that there are people who get credit for a tackle, and you'll see that there are people who will get credit for a partial tackle, usually like a half tackle, right? And so what they've basically done is they figured out how to break down footage frame by frame to figure out in small fractions and small percentages how much a player is responsible for a tackle. So let me bring this up real quick and show you how this looks. This is pretty cool. This is one that I actually do hope they implement, because one, sometimes there are people who make an impact away from the ball that they don't get credit for because they weren't part of the actual tackle, right? But what this group did is they defined tackling. They said, hey, whenever you're going to tackle somebody, your job is basically to slow down the momentum of the ball carrier until you stop them or until you bring them to the ground. So instead of them just looking at when the player gets tackled, they actually decided to break it down frame by frame from the point after which a ball carrier actually starts to make contact with the person, and analyze how much each person is responsible for stopping the momentum of that ball carrier. So not only will this help you better analyze defensive players and how effective they are, because instead of them not getting credit at all or automatically getting credit for a half tackle, maybe that person who wasn't in on the tackle but kind of grabbed that player a few yards before they were stopped, maybe they do get a credit for 0.05% of the tackle instead of nothing, or maybe some of the players who are getting, credit for the whole tackle themselves, maybe now it's like, well, yeah, you brought them to the ground, but we're going to give you 0.8. But also when it comes to analyzing things like the yak merchants of the NFL and how effective they are, also the running backs and how effective they are, you can look at what the fractional tackles are against them to also analyze their gameplay. So this is for the defensive side, the way that they set it up, but I think it has a lot of implications for the offensive side of the ball as well. So this graph right here, the line is the momentum of the ball carrier. So one of the things that they talk about in their project is like they have these 3 yellow lines, which are boxes where someone made contact with the ball carrier. So if you look at that first box that's right at 3 seconds, somebody made contact with that ball carrier, but his momentum kept going. The chart kept going up. So that person would not get any credit at all. Even though they touched the ball carrier, they didn't slow down their momentum. The people who start getting credit are the people after the second box, right around 4 seconds. And then, of course, the big box after that, that leads to the player being taken to the ground. And so I'm not going to read y'all the whole thing. I'm like looking for the video that they put with it. I can't find the video, but y'all can look at the moving dots. So I'm not going to break down the whole thing, but essentially what they're doing is they're breaking down the footage frame by frame, and they're looking at when the ball carrier's momentum changes, and they're tracking who makes contact with the ball carrier and how much their momentum changes based on what's happening frame by frame. So I think this is one that the NFL could really use. It's something that some players could use to like enhance their value. Like, hey, look at my fractional tackle numbers. It works for players on both sides of the ball in terms of receivers that really want more detail into how effective they are in terms of yards after catch. So like the sports nerd in me is super fucking excited about this one. I'm like, yes, implement this ASAP. I would love to see this on the morning shows. I would love to see it on Next Gen Stats on Amazon. This would be dope. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing this one. I think there was only one other one that I wanted to actually bring up on the screen. So one of the other projects that is a finalist is the impact of setting the edge on zone run plays. So that's brought to us by Sean Hawk, Marion Haney, Devin Baisley, and Vinay Mari. And they worked with coaches to prove the importance of setting the edge and its key attributes to stopping inside zone runs. And so they examined the directional change of the ball carrier, and they proposed a new metric to evaluate edge setting performance at the first level of inside zone plays. And so they basically used the player tracking data. They said we introduced a fluid quantitative definition of edge intensity. So that's their new analytic metric, would be edge intensity. And then they offered analytical insights for coaches. So sounds dope. Cool. But the last one that I'm like super, super excited about is called spatial edge technique. So they're introducing an analytical term called SET, and it stands for spatial edge technique. It's a framework to evaluate edge setters, and it's brought to us by Smit Baha and Viren Bashia, and they're actually in the undergraduate level of this contest. So I'm gonna bring that one up so y'all can see what it looks like. I think there was a video to go with it, and if not, my bad. And then when I'm allergies, y'all, they're fucking with me. But yeah, then when I'm done with this, we'll talk about Stephen Jones and what he had to say. So they define spatial edge technique as a measure of a defender's ability to set the outside edge and force the ball carrier inside. So Cowboys fans, you know how a lot of us were like, why do they keep trying to get Tony Pollard to run outside? Like to run inside, he's doing much better outside. Like he's not a between the tackles runner. And that was like really frustrating. So basically this analytical framework would help to figure out if that's really because of the play calling or because of shortcomings of Tony Pollard, or if it's because the defense is just so effective that Tony Pollard didn't have as many options. So they said this metric expands on ESPN Analytics' revolutionary run-stop win rate. More specifically, SET quantifies the extent to which defenders win control of the outside edge and includes defensive backs and outside linebackers in its evaluation. They said, from what we can tell, there's no public model or metric that specifically focuses on edge setting. We hope to introduce a novel framework to quantify the prelude to the tackle in these select situations. So the whole idea of it is that they're basically trying to quantify the importance of setting the edge, and they're using information and player analytics from more positions in order to do that. So part of it is the idea that once a runner gets to the outside, a lot of times there are defensive players who are just never going to catch that guy. So they're basically excluded from the play at that point. And so the whole premise of this project was the idea that, yo, this is actually a significant stat, because if a defense is good at setting the edge, they're basically forcing that runner back inside and ensuring that they still have an opportunity for all these other defensive players to get involved. So it's not just about tackling, it's not just about coverage. This is about, a player who might not necessarily even make contact with a runner, but still forces them inside. And basically stops the run without being the person to actually stop the run, if that makes sense. So let me see if they have a video that goes along with this, and we'll go over. I don't know if I want to play the full YouTube videos. Okay, I forgot how complicated their charts were. So I'm not going to nerd out on y'all that hard, but I will say this one and then the other one about analyzing the fractional tackles. Those two are my favorite. So good luck to those guys. And good luck to the runners up and honorable mention people. I know they're not winning, but their technology still might be used. So shout out to them. And yeah, everybody keep an eye on Next Gen Stats and Amazon's broadcasts next year and see if y'all see any of this stuff. Dom said a stat for setting the edge would be massive. Yeah, 2 of the finalist projects are actually related to that. And that last one I showed you, I think is truly, truly phenomenal. And it'll tell us a lot. So, and Clement agrees. Hi, Clement. Good to see you. So I'm glad y'all enjoyed that, because sometimes I'm just like, oh my goodness, I'm nerding out here. I don't know if anybody else gives a fuck about any of this. So I'm glad that y'all at least are excited about the prospect of that coming to the NFL. Okay, so all that being said, I'm sad to see why you nerded out. Man, I love that kind of stuff. Honestly, honestly, later today or tomorrow, I'm probably going to go and look at all the rest of the projects, because they have the whole list of all the finalists and the runners up and the honorable mention. And I'm like, I want to look at all of them. So if any of them look really cool, I might come on tomorrow and be like, yo, we have more shout outs. Let me tell you about this other cool ass project and what they're quantifying. So yeah, we'll see what happens. I know one thing that I do want to talk about tomorrow is Jeremiah Daniels, his press conference that he did in advance of the combine. It was a 2-hour conference call, and he said some interesting things about some of the players who are expected to show up at the combine. Speaking of which, before we get into Stephen Jones, let me just give a quick shout out to the quarterbacks who are taking a lot of heat for saying that they're not going to throw at the combine. So one of them is Caleb Williams, who, as y'all know, has my heart 100%. And then I think, who was it? I think it's the top 3 candidates: Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and did Drake May also say that he wasn't going to throw at the combine? I think I read that somewhere. But yeah, they're taking a little bit of heat for saying that they're not going to throw. But my thing about it is this: they said they're going to throw at their pro days. And from what I understand about the combine is that the combine is actually like a very stressful event. And there's a lot of interviews that happen. There's a lot of conversations that happen. And when it comes to actually executing the drills, for example, these quarterbacks only get a couple of chances to get it right. And so I know there are some people who are like, I want to see them at the combine. But honestly, considering how these quarterbacks are being talked about already, I just don't see us seeing anything at the combine that's going to really change our minds about them. Especially nothing that people are actually going to take as a true measure of who they are. Because even if they went to the combine and fucked up royally, most people are going to say, but we have so much film that shows them being a high-performing quarterback. So they're going to write it off as a fluke anyway. And then if they go to the combine and they do really well, everybody's going to be like, well, that's Caleb Williams. Of course he did really well. So with there being so many participants anyway, and there being such a heavy focus on standardized testing, on physical and medical evaluations, on interviews, I really don't blame these players for saying, like, you know what? There's enough going on. 5 million people want to have dinner with me. All these people want to interview me. I got to take this test. I got to take that test. Yada, yada, yada. It's a lot of pressure. The press is following me. Like, I really don't blame them for being like, you know what? I'm not gonna stand in line and throw the ball twice. I'm gonna let these people come see me at my pro day. At least at my pro day, I know for sure there will be scouts there who are representing teams who are interested in me. And I don't have to worry about performing in front of the entire league. So I don't have a problem with it. I think it's fine. I think what people really want to know about Caleb Williams in terms of his mental toughness is going to come out in the interviews. That's really what people want to know. Because whatever you think about Caleb Williams' gameplay, and I always say, as much as I love Caleb Williams, I do think there's some development that needs to be done. I do think that there's a lot of cleaning up that needs to be done. Granted, one thing that we have to remember when we watch film of Caleb Williams is that he was sacked. I don't remember how many times, but it was a lot. And there's also the fact that his defense wasn't always on top of it. When they were able to hold a team to under 30 something points, Caleb did really well. But in a lot of those other games, he was chasing points. And I think it led him to do things that were reckless, and maybe not the smartest. So, but even from that aspect, those are things that teams are going to want to talk to him about and be like, yo, in this game, you did this. What were you thinking? Like, why did you do that? You know? So I really think that interviews for Caleb Williams are going to play a bigger role and be way more important than throwing the ball. So while a lot of people are upset for various reasons that I don't really understand, if I'm being honest, I don't have a problem with it. I think it's fine. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. It's okay. Sometimes I think NFL fans are just bored and they're just looking for things to have outrage about. They're just like, my team's not playing. What am I supposed to do with all this outrage? I'm going to take it out on these quarterbacks who are not even in the NFL yet because how dare they not throw at the combine? It's wild. Chill out, y'all. Go play a game. Zach Wilson got drafted because of one throw at his pro day. The same thing could happen at the combine, though, you know? I think that this... I really think that sometimes people... I'm going to think about how I want to respond to that. And I'm going to tell you either later or tomorrow, because I want to make sure I get my words right and not accidentally insult anyone or say the wrong thing. But mistakes are going to be made. I do think that there's a way to avoid the mistakes. Like, for example, with Caleb Williams. We'll talk about him because he's somebody that I watch a lot. He's, out of everybody in the draft, he's probably the player that I've watched the most over the past few years, right? And one thing that I'll say about him is that people are so impressed by his improvisation, by his raw talent, by his understanding of the game, by his ability to make quick decisions, that I don't really think that they're paying attention to the areas in which he needs to develop. They're not really paying attention to, like, what would he look like if he were with a coach that wanted to put him under center, for example. That's not a thing that he really did. I don't think he did it ever. Did he do it ever? I don't think he did it ever. That's not his thing, right? So, like, who is he actually a good fit for? How good is he actually at reading defenses, especially if given time, right? A lot of times his decisions were rushed. What happens when he's in a position where maybe he's with other offensive players or he has an offensive coordinator or a head coach who doesn't want him like doing so many unscripted plays, and scrambling so much, so on and so forth. And so I just think people are expecting him to be as impactful for whatever pro team that he ends up with as he was for Oklahoma and as he was for USC. And those were just very different situations than what I think he's going to deal with once he gets in the NFL. You can get away with a lot of shit at the college level that you just cannot get away with in the NFL. So somebody said Don made a good point. Oh, about Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson got drafted because of one throw at his pro day. To me, that's just negligence. You can't draft somebody because of one throw. That's crazy. So there's my response to that. That is negligence. Which has more value, the NFL Combine or NFL Pro Day? I think it depends. So like I said, a lot of people have questions about I didn't plan on talking about this so much. A lot of people have questions about Caleb Williams and his mindset, for example. There's speculation that he's not a tough person and that he might not be able to handle the pressure that comes along with being an NFL quarterback. And then some of the questions when it comes to reading defenses or how he would handle certain styles of offense. Some of that could be answered via an interview. And there are a lot of interviews and conversations and a lot of observation that happens at a combine. So for someone like him, that's going to be more important. And then if anybody has any questions about, let's say, for example, who's someone who maybe had an injury or an up and down, Penix. Penix had an injury in his last game of the season, right? Somebody stepped on his ankle or something like that in that last game they had, right? So somebody might want to go to his pro day to get a closer look at him and to see how he moves. Now, of course, they can see that at the combine, but they might have more opportunities to see that, or if they want to see it again. So naturally they're going to do their physicals, they're going to do their medical evaluations at the combine. They can also do them again at the pro day. And it also gives him more opportunities to do things that have been scripted with his quarterbacks coach or offensive coordinator or whoever, right? So anybody who has any real questions like that, the pro day might end up like really coming into play, So that's just a couple of examples. But yeah, I think it's very situational, which is more important. And it's also up to the scouts and decision makers to decide what they want to put more weight on, because they might see a player at both. They might see a player at the combine, also see him at the pro day, and they might see varying sets of information. And then they have to sit down and be like, okay, which one do we want to put more stock in? And they just have to decide for themselves. Wide receiver class is strong this year. I agree. Micah's brother essentially said LVE has retired, said it like 40 minutes ago. Feel free to DM me that tweet. I have mixed feelings about anything that Micah's brother says, but that is a different conversation for a different day. Okay. So let's talk about these comments from Stephen Jones. So some of what Stephen Jones said, and I want to bring up Nick Harris's Twitter account real quick because I feel like he started tweeting even more stuff after I went live or after I bookmarked certain things. So I just want to look and see if there's anything else. Oh, he's got video from Dan Quinn. Apparently Dan Quinn is talking about the playoff loss to the Green Bay Packers. I'm going to bring that one up. I haven't heard the soundbite yet, so we can bring that up and see what he has to say. And there's another video where he talked about his time with Micah Parsons. I don't care as much about that. He spoke on his time in Dallas and what it could take for the Cowboys to take the next step. I don't want to hear his opinion on that. Okay. Let's pull up this clip of Dan Quinn talking about the loss of the Green Bay Packers. It's about 40 seconds. It'll be a surprise for all of us. Or at least for me. Maybe y'all have seen it already. I've been busy for the past couple of hours, so I haven't seen it.
Look back at that game to see.
Yeah, of course. That was a huge after action to find why that performance wasn't to the standard, that we had set. And I wish there was one thing to say, this is one thing that we could have done differently in that space, because those games are the ones that leave a scar. They were hard to deal with. The team had been an excellent tackling team, creating takeaways, and so not having to be in the same space for that hurt and that stung. But if there was one thing that you would have put your finger on, you certainly would have done that early to go. But the team had been excellent at not allowing explosive plays, and certainly in that game more than was needed.
Dan, you look back at that game to see. Look back at that game to see.
Yeah, of course. That was a huge after action to find why that performance wasn't to the standard, that we had set. And I wish there was one thing to say, this is one thing that we could have done differently in that space, because those games are the ones that leave a scar. They were hard to deal with. The team had been an excellent tackling team, creating takeaways, and so not having to be in the same space for that hurt and that stung. But if there was one thing that you would have put your finger on, you certainly would have done that early to go. But the team had been excellent at not allowing explosive plays, and certainly in that game, more than was needed.
Dan, you were.
Sorry, y'all. I had to play that twice because I was like, did he actually say anything of value here? Did he actually answer the question? And the answer to that for me is no. So whoever in the comments said total BS, my Dan, J Money, how you doing? Agreed. And Clement says total nonsense from Dan. Also agreed. J Money said saying that team like you wasn't the coach. Oh my God. And Dom also agrees that Dan is on BS. Yeah, agreed. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time talking about that because yeah, there's better things for us to talk about right now. What I will do is pull up some of the comments from Stephen Jones. Some of it is tweets, some of it is video, and we'll talk about both. I'm gonna just pull up the screen. I might end up hopping all around from in different tabs, but I trust y'all to bear with me on this, and hopefully y'all don't laugh at me the way y'all laugh at me when my light goes out. Said, I can't DM it. I gotta be verified. I thought I fixed that setting. My bad. I'll just go to his account and we'll look at it. But we'll start with what I have bookmarked. Let's see. So, Stephen Jones talked about the rule changes. Nothing really major there. There's a different part of the year that I like to talk about the rule changes. So I will talk about those things, but it'll be closer to when the NFL team owners have their annual meeting, because that's when they actually get the full proposals and you can see in detail what they're suggesting. But I know one thing that they brought up was the fumbling out of the opposite end zone, and it doesn't seem like that rule is going to go anywhere. They discussed hip drop tackling, which I personally don't think should be penalized. I think that's a situation where in all sports you're taught, or all contact sports at least, you're taught certain methods for protecting yourself whenever you collide, make contact with, or you're tackled by another person. And what I see a lot of times with these hip drop tackles is players extending when they should be trying to fall small. They're trying to get extra yards, and they're trying to like reach out as far as they can go. And what they end up doing is putting themselves in a position where their ankles and feet are going under the person who's tackling them. Whereas if they would protect themselves and fall small, those tackles would not be nearly as dangerous. And so I know it's not a popular opinion, but I really do think that this is a situation where the spike in injuries that we're seeing is on the parts of both people. And I really do think that the player being tackled is in a position to adjust what they do and prioritize their own health and safety over a couple of extra yards for the sake of making sure that they don't suffer those injuries. So sorry if anybody's offended by that, but that's just what I'm seeing. Like every single time it's a bad injury, it's like that player was extended, and had they collapsed or fallen small, their ankles would not have ended up underneath that defender. So to me, that's where the issue is. Dom said you can't outlaw a tackle. I mean, they have in the past. Horse collar tackles, for example, face masks, but those are like places like on the body or on the apparatus that you shouldn't grab or touch. I do think for what the hip drop tackle is, it would be really hard to police that. It would be really difficult to define that in a way to where it would actually be fair. So even based on that alone, I don't really see them getting very far with trying to make it illegal. And even if it is, right? Even if you do make it illegal, I think all that's going to happen is it's going to make people pay more attention to how they're tackling, because it's not like you're going to outlaw tackling below the waist, right? So all that's going to happen is people are still going to adjust how they're tackling. And if the person being tackled doesn't adjust how they fall and how they go to the ground, you're still going to end up with this issue where ankles and feet get trapped underneath defenders. So even if they could figure out how to define it, and if they could figure out how to outlaw it, I still don't see that solving the problem of the injuries that are occurring. I still think it's going to come down to players remembering how to fall small, how to fall safely, and not putting sensitive body parts in harm's way. So, but yeah, those, and I think there was another kickoff rule discussed, possibly taking something that was used in the XFL for a while. That's another one that I'm definitely going to wait until the owners meeting for, because when it comes to that, I want to be able to read the entire proposal and see what they have to say. So they asked Stephen Jones about that. Um, they asked him about Trayvon Diggs and some other players, and he gave pretty standard answers. Here's the first video, though, that I'm sure we've all seen, where Stephen Jones talks about Jerry Jones being all in. So we're going to listen to that, and I'm going to talk about why I feel like not only is it some bullshit, but he definitely kind of put his foot in his mouth whenever it came to what he said in regards to the situation.
To step up and make big plays in the postseason. I've never known Jerry not to be all in any given year, but certainly, we've got I think, a great team put together. I think the last 3 years won a lot of football games. I think 36, and certainly where we have to improve is the postseason. We're going to get the right kind of guys who step up and make big plays in the postseason. It's been a challenge in terms of our success there, and that's where we have to improve.
Are there any answers that you guys have kind of come up with as to what's going on?
We're taking a holistic view of this thing, and we'll continue to look at it. Obviously, being here at the Combine is going to be, a great time to spend some time in terms of looking not only at the young players that are going to be out there, but just spending time, together internally, spending a lot of time talking about what we have to get accomplished, we think, in order to take the next step.
Okay, so he said that they're taking a holistic view of the whole thing. He said that they need to find guys who can make big plays in the postseason. But he started off that statement by saying, well, Jerry goes all in every year. And I don't know if he meant that to be like a good thing. But the reason why my thumbnail said, Stephen Jones puts his foot all in his mouth is because essentially what that made people think is that, like, okay, we haven't been satisfied with what Jerry Jones has done the past few years. So if that was going all in, and he's also going all in this year, then how are we supposed to trust the decisions that he's going to make? How are we supposed to expect it to be anything different? And so instead of inspiring confidence or inspiring hope in the fan base, what he did was take the little bit of hope that a lot of people had and basically say, like, well, you should actually expect the same old bullshit from the past seasons. And so I feel like anybody who heard that soundbite is just like, oh, great. And then there's also how vague he was in response to the rest of the questions. For them to say, like, have you pinpointed anything that you need to work on? I feel like it's not really too hard to acknowledge, like, we have some deficiencies on the defensive side of the ball for sure. Like the issues at linebacker were discussed for half the season, So I think had he named that one thing to make it at least look like he was paying attention, people might have felt differently. But you know what he sounded like? Any of y'all ever been in school and you had like assigned reading, and then the teacher calls on people to answer questions, and then there's that like one person who maybe they normally do the reading, maybe they don't, but that day they definitely didn't. And so they don't know enough to actually answer the question, but they do know enough to bullshit their way through the question. That's what Stephen Jones sounded like answering those questions. Like, he sounded like he has paid zero attention to this team. He sounded like he has given zero thought to the needs of this team. He sounded like he's going to this combine with no clue what they're looking for. Like, what are y'all doing? Like, what have y'all pinpointed, to have different results? We need somebody to make big plays in the postseason. Really? That's your answer? Oh, we're taking a holistic view. You're at the combine, sir. You don't need to take a holistic view. You need to be thinking about what you're going to do with these picks. And to me, now is not the time to take a holistic view. If you're at the combine, you're looking at prospects. You should be deciding who's the best fit And I feel like in your position, you should have an idea at least of what position you're looking for, if not the players. And of course, we don't expect you to tell us who's on the board, who the players are that you're looking at. We'll find out soon because we know how much y'all love the people y'all invite for 30 visits. Cool. But I just feel like a more detailed answer, maybe not throwing your dad under the bus. Man, it's just crazy. Like some teams, they hire people to come up with statements for these situations. And the fact that the Joneses just keep putting their foot in their mouths and keep just saying things that not only don't inspire confidence, but actually make people feel worse about their team. I'm just like, okay, so this isn't just a team thing where they have problem with hiring and getting the right people in place. Like they just in life seem to not know how to get the right people in the right positions to help them. So let's see what we got. Y'all have had a lot to say in the past few minutes. Clement said football is a contact sport and injuries happen. True. Can't outlaw tackling in the game. It's bad enough that you can't hit people above the waist, so they have to go low to make a tackle. I get not hitting people at certain points above the waist, but I do believe the way that it's enforced is a little bit excessive. Like sometimes they call penalties on people who like breathe too hard on another player's chest. It's like it's crazy. Dom said, for a while I thought Steven would be the breath of fresh air. Oh, no. But it seems like he's the problem. He's definitely a big part of the problem. And he doesn't have the same kind of charisma and appeal that Jerry Jones does. So it's like not only are you not a part of the solution, nobody even really likes you for real. So it's like a double whammy for Steven Jones. It's like there's just no upside to this guy. Clement said the audio is low in the video. Oh, my bad. I'll see if I can turn it up next time. Let's see what else y'all said. Dom said, we all know what our needs are, including other teams, but we don't want to tell everybody what the emphasis is in the draft. Okay, fair enough. I guess just whenever it comes to answering that question. So, for example, he started off his answer about what they needed to fix with like, well, we've got 36 wins the past couple years. Nobody wants to hear that right now. Like, I feel like he could have just skipped that and just been like, I recognize that we've had issues in the postseason, and some of them are things that we saw glimpses of in the regular season. And so we need to find people who can fill in those gaps. We need to find people who are not only effective in the postseason, but who can also fill in some of the deficiencies that we've actually had for a couple years in a row, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I feel like you can say that without giving a lot away, but also you're acknowledging that, yes, there are issues that need to be resolved with your team. But he was talking as though the Cowboys don't have real issues. Like, he was talking as though the Cowboys' issues are, like, imaginary. Like, fans have just been complaining since January about figments of our imagination. I don't know. You get on my nerves. Let me go to this next video, though. And hopefully the audio is a little bit better. If it's not, I apologize. There's not much I can do about that. Okay.
I will say that. I mean, if you're not that, I think from the organization on down, we feel good about our culture. You always want to be better. I will say that. I mean, if you're not, if your results aren't winning the Super Bowl, I think everybody's saying, how do you ultimately be the last guy standing? But I think overall, between, organizationally, between, our coach, our personnel department, I think our leadership on our team's outstanding. So, you're always going to have somebody who's, going to say something, that's not, that might be, hey, that's their particular thought process on why we may have come up short, but I don't think in general, personally, I don't think it's an issue.
Okay, so In that clip, Stephen Jones is explaining that he doesn't think that there's an issue with the culture of the Dallas Cowboys. And towards the end of the clip, he said, well, with the results that we got, there's always going to be somebody who has their personal opinion about why we came up short. But personally, I don't think there's an issue. The reason why this is a problem for me is because most of the people who were talking about the issues with the Cowboys were either former players or current players. And the current players, specifically CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons, were very specific. They weren't like generally like, oh, we have cultural issues. Like they brought up penalties specifically. They brought up some other bad habits on offense and defense that they wanted to specifically address, and also how they plan to address them. And I feel like when you have your star players coming out and saying, hey, these are some issues with the team that we actually saw throughout the season, and they came back and they bit us in the postseason. And then you, as a leader of the organization, come out and say, well, people always got something to say. I don't think there's a problem. You are undermining everything that they're saying about their experience as players and what they'd like to see improved on the team. And so it's another example of him putting his foot in his mouth, because now if anybody actually does buy into what Stephen Jones is saying, it leaves room to question the validity of what Micah and CD were saying. And if you start questioning the validity of what they were saying, then you have to start questioning, okay, what actually did go wrong with the team? Were they telling the truth and Stephen Jones is actually just that much out the loop? Or were they exaggerating and he's right? Or does it mean that they were telling the truth, but Stephen Jones isn't going to hold the coaches accountable, which means if the coaches aren't held accountable, then everything that CD and Micah said that they were going to try to do to improve the culture and to improve the mindset and to improve the performance of the team is going to be undermined by coaches who aren't being held accountable and who are under no obligation to actually improve, because the leadership is satisfied with 12 regular season wins and a bullshit postseason performance, So I just feel like it's another example of Stephen Jones either being completely out the loop or undermining Micah Parsons on purpose. Either way, neither one of those scenarios is acceptable, in my opinion. For his position within the organization, he should be very much aware of what his star players are out there saying. And if he knows that both Micah and CD have come out and given this very specific account of what they thought was going wrong from a discipline perspective, from an execution perspective, from a cultural perspective, then the least he could do is say, hey, I know that there are some things that we need to resolve, but I'm optimistic that they'll be taken care of. I'm not worried about the odds or abilities of our coaches to come in this season and to address all the things that we have concerns about. Like, why is that hard? Like, why are we sitting up here pretending like, oh, the Cowboys have no issues, everything's fine, everything's fine? Like, it's such bullshit on so many levels to me. Al, how's it going? Good to see you. Al said, Jerry and his son want you to think they know what they are doing. They really do. They don't. You're right. They don't. This is why you hire GM as an owner and let them make specific moves and run the team. I agree 100%. Ever since I heard Jerry make his all-in statement about them going all in, I said, unless they hire a GM, they're not going all in. To me, it's the equivalent of people who say, I want to lose weight, I want to get in shape, but they've been trying for years and years to do it, but they won't hire a personal trainer. And people are like, hey, why don't you hire a trainer? Since you keep trying to get fit, but it doesn't seem to be working, why don't you hire somebody whose job it is to ensure that you reach these goals? And you're just like, nah, if I just try really hard this time, it'll work. It's like, are you really going to believe that person is doing everything they can to reach their goal? Or are you going to be like, well, they say they want that goal, but they're not really going after it like that? That's what's happening with the Joneses. Like, they say they want a Super Bowl, but not if it means hiring a general manager and giving up a little bit of the power that they have over the team. Like, no. Like, they say they want a Super Bowl. They say they want to go all in, but, not if it means having somebody else come in and having them have the option to make certain decisions. Like, not if that's what going all in means. Like, they would rather keep trying and failing than to just do the one thing that seems to have worked for other teams that have gotten where they want to go. right? Well, I won't say the one thing. Like, you could really break it down into several things that the Joneses haven't done that these other teams have done. But that is a very major thing, and it would be the place to start. Because whether you want to look at it as the makeup of your defense, the makeup of your offense, the coaches you bring in, the philosophy of the organization, whatever, at the end of the day, having someone to come in and help make those hiring decisions and help make those contract decisions and help bring in the right players would be a major step in the right direction. And they simply will not do it. Outside the Joneses may not have a problem. After all, they have a sales mentality. This is facts. And that's something I've always said about Jerry Jones. As an owner, he's phenomenal when it comes to ensuring that the Cowboys have a very high value, that they're marketed well, that everybody around the world knows the Dallas Cowboys. They know that logo. Phenomenal. He's great at that. Putting a team together does not seem to be his forte. Picking coaches does not seem to be his forte. They're about talking up the team even when the team loses playoff games. And unfortunately, people buy into it. That's actually something else that I was going to talk about. And I might talk about it a little bit more tomorrow. But like when you read the press release for the Combine, and just the way the NFL talks about NFL Plus, NFL Media, and NFL Digital Media, it is so obvious that they are making this move into the digital space and trying to have like a bigger footprint on YouTube, a bigger footprint on Twitter. They want to have more podcasts, more listeners for their podcasts, so on and so forth. And the reason why I'm kind of paying attention to how that affects the fan base is because for a while, it's been kind of this divide where it's like, the 4-letter networks are like for the casuals and for the people who don't really know what's going on and don't really want to know what's going on. On the other hand, you've got these YouTubers and these content creators who have been great about getting good information, about delivering nuance to the fans, right? And so now what we're seeing is those content creators and YouTubers are getting bigger fan bases. They're actually making money at this. They're getting sponsors. They're getting advertisers. And so now you're seeing these larger organizations want to come into that space. And I'm really curious to see what that does in terms of what fans are exposed to, right? Because right now, for example, there are a lot of mornings where I have to go and either train a client or teach a fitness class or both. And then as soon as I get done with that for my morning break, I'm listening to Will Still, A to Z Sports in the morning, right? Now, because of how I consume content, it is literally just as easy for me to turn on Will Still as it is for me to turn on Stephen A. Smith. If I want to listen to Will, I open up my YouTube app. Because I've subscribed, it's right there. I click on it. I usually end up coming into the middle of an episode. I go back to the beginning. I increase the playback speed so I can catch up and I watch the episode. If I wanted to watch First Take, it would be the same thing, except I would go through YouTube TV. Go to YouTube TV, click on it, usually in the middle of an episode, increase the playback speed and catch up. It is literally the same process at this point. It's just a matter of who I want to listen to the most, and that determines which app I go to. But now I just feel like with them ending up on every app, now they're on Spotify with their podcasts, or on Google Podcasts, or on Apple Podcasts, they're coming into YouTube. And of course, they're going to put money into these things to make it more likely that sports fans and fans of particular teams actually see more of their content, even if you're not subscribed. It's just going to be recommended more. I'm really curious how that's going to play out in terms of what football fans buy into, what they end up believing, and just their overall impression of the decisions that are being made. Speaking of which, and this kind of ties it all in together. I'm like rambling about everything that I've read today so far to y'all. So I appreciate y'all for hanging out and listening. But like, for example, the salary cap situation. One of the reasons why Stephen Jones is called Catboy is because he is so stingy. And when it comes to discussing player contracts, he's always bringing up this pie concept as though the salary cap is that simple. And then there are some people who buy into it and start to believe that the salary cap really is that simple. There are people who cannot stand Dak Prescott because they really believe that he takes up so much of the salary cap by himself that the Dallas Cowboys cannot go out and get other good players. Like, they really believe this, even though we're seeing other quarterbacks getting paid more than him and still having like teams that are more successful in the postseason, right? We see this, and they never ask themselves, why can those teams do it, but our team can't do it? Well, the reason why is because the salary cap is not like a pie. It's not that simple. A lot of it has to do with how these contracts are structured. And so, J Money, the cap does exist, but it just doesn't exist the way a lot of people seem to think it does, in the sense that what it says on paper that a player is getting per year is not the same as their cap hit. And it's crazy to me how many people still do not realize it. And so, one of the other things that has happened this past, or happened this off season, but like the effects of it come from the past several seasons, is the increase in the salary cap. So one of the reasons why a lot of teams were signing some of their players, especially quarterbacks, to these large contracts, but basically pushing the cap hit down the road, was because they anticipated that there would be a spike in the salary cap this year. However, previously, it was predicted that it would be about like 240 to 245 million. That was the prediction. And it actually ended up being over $255 million per club. So 255.4 is the salary cap. 255.4 million is the salary cap, right? And so that's I forget the percentage increase, but it's like an unprecedented increase in terms of year over year. Yeah, 30 million. It is insane. But here's the thing, Dom. Part of the reason that they were able to do that was because there was a full repayment of all the amounts that were advanced by the clubs and deferred by players from the COVID pandemic. So basically, when 2020, well, not at the start of 2020, but when the pandemic hit and quarantine started happening, and the NFL realized that that was going to affect their revenue from multiple sources, they basically made an adjustment in the CBA. And an adjustment to how they were going to calculate the salary cap and stuff. And so basically, they decided to spread the impact of any revenue shortfall over the next 4 years, beginning in 2021. So any GM, any owner who was paying attention to that and realized, well, one, we're spreading out this impact over the next 4 years starting in 2021. And two, every time we go to these meetings, they tell us that we're on time with paying back XYZ in terms of what we have to settle with the league for because of how we of how we deferred certain things whenever the pandemic happened. They were keeping track of the fact that, like, okay, we're probably going to end up paying these things on time. Also, we have the impact of the shortcoming of revenue spread out over 4 years. So that's going to lead to an even bigger increase. So I didn't find anybody who predicted this big of an increase, but basically anybody who was paying attention to that, as well as the media rights deals, knew that the salary cap was going to keep going up. So they felt confident in signing their quarterbacks to these huge deals. They weren't scared that it was going to like fuck up their cap, because they're actually like looking at this and analyzing this, and they have actual financial analysts and people who understand this business in the building helping make these decisions. Whereas on the Cowboys side of things, it sounds like that's not so much the case. And so sometimes I get frustrated because I'm like, Stephen Jones really wants people to think the salary cap is a pie. But then I hear him make statements like what he made today, and I'm like, maybe he like literally doesn't understand the salary cap. Like maybe he doesn't understand it. So when he's asked questions about it, he says dumb things, not because he's trying to bamboozle the fan base, but because he literally doesn't understand it himself. And so he's answering based on his best understanding, which is an awful understanding. I feel like I've gone so hard on Stephen Jones tonight. Now I'm like basically calling him stupid. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm sorry if there are any Stephen Jones fans in the building. Dom said it's going to go up another 30 next year. It don't matter. I don't know if it's going to go up another 30, but it's possible. There are so many things in the works that could impact the way that the salary cap is calculated. So there's pending deals with ESPN. There's the fact that a lot of these media companies are expanding from not only cable to also digital platform and streaming platforms. Like some of the things that they did in terms of putting certain games behind a paywall, while people complained about them, in terms of numbers and revenue, those games actually ended up being really successful showings for the NFL. So they're probably going to do more of that. Then you've also got the fact that they're trying to expand even more internationally. Then you've also got the fact that flag football, which the NFL is heavily invested in, is going to get bigger and bigger as the Olympics approach. There are just so many things that point to the NFL's revenue going up and up. So while thinking about another $30 million jump is crazy, it's not impossible. It's not impossible. It could totally happen. Mike said, "Don't be sorry. He deserves to get got." Okay, I won't be sorry. But that is about all that I have today. So now y'all know in detail how I feel about Stephen Jones. And yeah, tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the comments that are coming out about some of the people that we're expected to see at the combine. If any interesting news comes out about anything that happens at the combine, because also although the drills and stuff haven't happened yet, there are people down there. Interviews are happening, conversations are happening, people are interacting. And let's be real, the NFL is messy, so who knows what headlines we might wake up to. And if nothing else, I can tell y'all a lot more about what's coming down the pipeline in terms of next gen stats and all the analytics that we might see in 2024 and beyond. But outside of that, thank you so much for joining me and for interacting in the chat. Much love to you guys. Yes, it is my intent to be on tomorrow, so hopefully I see you then. This has been another episode of Bitches Love Sports. Yes, the light stayed on. Let me hurry up and log off before it goes off and y'all laugh at me again. I'm Jasmine Monet and I'm out.